Welcome to the R Labs podcast. Our special guest today, I really don't know where he's coming from. We'll find out, but it's Tanmai Gopal. Tanmai, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Bill. Hey, everybody.
So where are you coming? Where are you right now that you're talking to us from?
San Francisco.
Oh, wow. You're in man, dude, I have not been back to San Francisco since the pandemic. So I used to love going to San Francisco though. I was there when Salesforce first opened up that park.
Oh, wow.
And that was really cool. And then I remember like a month later, the support beams were cracking and I had to shut it all down.
I live super close to the Salesforce park.
So, I was just like, you guys spent $1 billion on a building and you couldn't figure out the park. Okay.
But I think it's the city's kind of coming back together, especially with all the AI stuff that's happening. There's a lot more events and there's lots of like developer things happening. So it feels pretty good. Very different from pandemic and even the years leading up to the pandemic.
So you were there pre-pandemic too?
I used to travel quite a bit before the pandemic, and then I moved here right after the pandemic.
So
But
you
I used
didn't
to
even
spend
get
maybe like half the year
okay.
pre-pandemic, yeah.
I'm glad to hear it's coming back because there was a lot going on at the time. Actually, for me, it was overwhelming. And one of the things I loved about living in Miami was I could be in line at a restaurant or a movie theater or something and not hear tech. But in San Francisco,
It's
no
not
matter where
possible.
you were, it
Yeah.
was impossible to escape tech.
Yeah,
And then you'd
that's-
hear these people that had no idea what they were talking about tech, and it would just like I would mind your own business, Bill. Mind your own business, Bill.
Yeah, I think that's the thing with all of the Bay Area, right? It's like it's diverse, but it's kind of not diverse because everybody's in tech, right? And that way I think like cities like New York are so much more diverse in that sense because when you're standing in line, you're meeting everybody from all walks of life, not just tech. Everybody here is tech or tech adjacent, which is good in some ways, and then kind of sucks in other ways.
The joke for me was if you wanted to be an entrepreneur, you just had to buy like 100 business cards and you were done. Like you didn't need anything else. Didn't need website, didn't need tech, just needed a business card. So when you're in line, you could say, oh yeah, I have my own company here. Though I guess that's old school now. I haven't printed business cards in 10 years, man.
That's true. That's
Like
true.
somebody wouldn't even know what to do. I remember in the 90s having one of those books that just took business cards, and which was brilliant because you could go back and find, remember somebody. But if you handed somebody a business card today,
Very confused.
what are they going to do with it? Okay, so Tanmai, give everybody the 2-minute spiel on what you're doing today.
I'm the CEO co-founder of a company called Hasura. We make it
Wait,
possible.
called what is it called?
Hasura. Hasura.
Hasura.
Yep.
I always pronounced it Hasura.
Yeah, you can call it Hasura, you can call it Hasura, you can call it Hasura.
So wait, you're the co-founder of Hasura.
Yep, and the CEO.
I played with that tech a few years ago.
Oh, that's awesome.
When I was doing some GraphQL. Let me make sure I get this. I played with you. I think I put your tech in front of a Postgres database? Yeah, in order to do GraphQL against it. It worked right out of the box. It was, other than the extra hop, it worked right out of the box, man.
Yep.
It was really interesting, actually.
Yep. And that's kind of where we started, where the idea was, you have applications, they need access to data to be useful. Usually you have to build APIs, and we kind of took this new approach to the way that you would build them. And so that kind of real-time data access for applications, that infrastructure is what we build. I think it's been a few years now, and we're in like half of the Fortune 100. Lots of developer-led adoption. Support has gone out from just Postgres databases to Mongo and all other kinds of like ClickHouse, different kinds of SQL, NoSQL, new SQL kind of data sources as well. And there's a whole bunch of stuff in the works for AI applications as well. But that's the quick spiel.
So I personally loved the idea of having a public API for accessing data that you didn't have to build that your front end teams could start working almost, because as an API developer, you always have to be ahead of the right, the front end developers to give them what they want. But now it was like overnight they had an API. Now, the argument against it that I always heard was that front end developers shouldn't have that data oriented API access so raw. I'm sure your opinion is the opposite, but that's the argument I always heard against it.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point. But I think like there's two kind of like subtleties to that, right? So the first is when you think about how Hasura derives its API, when you kind of get started, right? What Hasura is actually doing is it's not deriving its API from the database. It's actually deriving its API from what we call metadata. The metadata is kind of this description of what models you want to expose in the API. So when you're kind of getting started quickly, then initially your API models and your data models look very similar, right? Because that's how you get started. And then over time they start to diverge, right? Over time you have API models that start to diverge from what your data models are like, right? And that's kind of when you realize that what Hasura is doing is that it's deriving your API from this metadata definition, right? So you derive what you describe what you want your model to look like. So you say I have a user that has these fields, it comes from this table or this query, or it comes from a combination of these two tables or whatever it is. And then Hasura kind of creates the API from that. So as you kind of use Hasura, you realize that one, it's deriving it from the metadata and not just the raw database. And so that kind of makes sure that there's this abstraction layer between what you expose on the API and between what you have in the database. That's one. But the second thing also is that, and I'm sure you've heard this kind of design when it comes to databases, right? Is that you want to make sure that the stuff that is there inside your databases is as close to the read and the query access patterns that you're actually going to use, that your developers are going to use, right? So the whole idea, for example, behind NoSQL databases and DynamoDB and Mongo and stuff like that, Cassandra and whatnot, is to make sure that you represent like the way that you create a document or the way that you create a particular table is close, and the columns that you index, etc., is the way that your front end is actually going to access that data, right? So you're not going to index all the columns in your database, for example. You're going to index the stuff which is commonly used for filtering. What happens when you know what you're doing and you're using your database well is that you're making sure that in your database you have these read models that are optimized for the way that it is going to be read. So usually what happens is, and for applications that are using Hasura well, is that the data models that your applications are going to be using are resembling the kind of read patterns that your application is actually going to have. And Hasura is kind of providing an additional layer of abstraction where it might not be a one-to-one mapping, right? And that kind of gives you that protection and make sure that you're not kind of exposing that database raw. So that's kind of the nuance there. But one other question that I often like to ask in to people who have this sentiment of saying I shouldn't give developers raw access to my database, my question is why not, right? But why not? What's the problem?
I'm
What
the
is,
same way. I'm always like, why not? I don't understand. It's an API. If they need that data, why not make it flexible for them to access that data? Oh, because they're going to write really bad queries and we can't protect them from themselves. I'm like, well, didn't we build this app and test it and make sure that we were
exactly.
doing things right?
Exactly. And then ultimately you allow only those queries in production that you don't use, right? It's not like that's it. You just you allow list the GraphQL queries that you've tested during that you've actually tested. That's what you actually use in production, right? So that's not even that is not that doesn't actually happen in practice, right?
For me, it's just another point of being biased against front end engineers,
Exactly.
as if they're not good enough, right? And I'm
Exactly.
always like, dude, front end engineers are better than me. I'm a back end engineer. I can't do that work. React is impossible to maintain, manage, and like.
Also they're closer to the end user, right? So they're more business facing, and you want to give people who are more business facing more and more power to do stuff, right? Because you want to give people who are closest to kind of the end user to iterate as quickly as possible without kind of getting in the way, right? Like if you think about the back end engineers, right? The back end engineers are people who are actually they're the implementation detail, right? They ought to, like, they're the first people who ought to not exist, right? Like, if imagine a post AI world, what you want to have is you want to have data, right? And then you want to have people building AI and AI applications, and you don't want to have this middle layer, because this middle layer is implementation detail that nobody cares about. What your user cares about is the final app experience that they use. Give them as much power as possible, make sure that it's secure, make sure that it's performant, but otherwise, why even get in their way, right?
It's a trust but verify situation
Exactly.
anyway, right?
Exactly.
So, and two questions, and then we're going to jump in the time machine. Who would necessarily be responsible for the data definitions? Not would we allow the front end devs to do those data definitions, or is it another sort of human being on the team?
Anybody. Typically, we notice that it's usually our best users are users who are experienced backend engineers who realize that I just ought to do my database work well, and if I do my database work well, 90% of my job is done, right? So experienced backend engineers who kind of come in and say, this is the way to use Postgres for the application that I have. They go in, they set up the right stuff on Postgres, boom, API is ready, give it off to the application. So people who are like their databases, so people who like Postgres or Mongo or ClickHouse, that is usually the person that comes in to use Hasura to say, let me get the most power out of this data source and then kind of make this available to my applications. Now,
Are
in
you all
small teams, it could be a full stack developer, right? It could be the front end developer who's familiar with kind of like, I like Postgres, I like Mongo, I like ClickHouse, that's what I'm going to use. In larger organizations, in enterprise kind of organizations, we often see that it's very kind of well tenured backendish DB like database experience type folks who have been in the organization for 5-10 years, who very deeply understand the hundreds of millions of records that they have in their system, what the access patterns are, what's slow, what's fast, like what data quality is good, like what ETL takes time. They have a
so
deep
let me
understanding.
interrupt you for a second, because the other argument here is that you're essentially opening up the database to the outside world in some form. So are you also handling some form of authentication via tokens,
Yes.
or and
Yes.
you're also doing maybe role based,
Yes.
so
So
that you have all that built in?
that's the most critical part of the engine, right? Because this is exactly when I ask people, I'm like, why don't you expose your database directly to front end developers? The first question is like, ooh, we feel bad about doing it. And so then we realize, wait, that's a myth, right? But the second piece, which is actually the true problem, is that you can't have unauthorized access to your business database, right? Obviously. You have a layer of authentication and critically authorization that determines that the right people get access to the right methods and the right data, right? So that authorization engine is a core part of what Hasura has at this infrastructure layer. It's not like it's not just a GraphQL to database protocol translator. The critical piece that it adds in the middle is security at the data model and the domain model level, right? So you can kind of go to a model and say, this account is accessible only if the account.owner equal to current user, or if account.owner.family.members contains the current user. So you can kind of traverse these relationships, properties of the user, property of the data,
Using JSON web tokens, essentially, I would
and these
imagine.
claims, right, they come
Yeah.
from JSON web tokens. But these rules of what is accessible, what fields are accessible, what fields are masked, what rows are accessible, these are all permission rules that are part of this metadata definition that goes inside Hasura, right? And then Hasura does the thing that an experienced engineer would do, which is it doesn't do select star from users, fetches all that data and then filters it. It does select star from user where user ID equal to current user, right? So it does this kind of predicate push down so that it selects just the right authorized data from the database, only pulls that piece out, and then sends that over to the application depending on those rules. But that innovation is critical, right? Because that missing layer of authn and auth is what we add on top of all databases. So it's the same authentication system and authorization system that works on one or more Postgreses or Postgres plus ClickHouse or whatever it is.
Do you have pre-hosted solutions for people who don't want to stand up their own
Yep.
sort of infrastructure? You have that. Okay.
Yep. So we have a
Nice.
managed cloud offering, and then we also have, and then of course there's like a bunch of like these Docker and help chart type things so that you can go deploy it wherever you want.
Do it locally. But I could run you next to my, not next to, but as close as possible in the same data center
Oh yeah,
whatever
easily.
that
You
is.
could, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
choose the region, choose the AZ, choose the cloud vendor. So
Nice.
if you're on GCP, choose your GCP region, go deploy it there.
And you have all the redundancy already built in, and
Correct, correct. We
yeah,
just
yeah, yeah.
launched we just launched our next generation version of the cloud product where it's available kind of on the edge. So it's, I think it's like 60 regions all over the world, and
Nice.
it's there's got like anycast routing. It'll route to the right Hasura instance, and then that'll forward that some to the connector that's closest to your database, right? So it does all of that.
Nice. So last thing before we jump in the time machine, when I was playing with this GraphQL stuff, I was playing around with Apollo.
Mm.
And what was fascinating to me was the idea of federation, the idea that I could have very different data stores, a Postgres, a Mongo, flat file, whatever it was. And Apollo would allow me to create this sort of federated schema, and it would know how to pull data and then somehow merge it all back together again. That was fascinating to me because I've built systems that had to do that before manually, and it's a big job. But here it was happening almost auto magically. I mean, it's a whole nother type of engineering. I wasn't incredibly successful with it because I was still new. But does Assure also have some form of federation, or are you leaving that up to like the Apollos
No,
of
we
the
do,
world?
we do federation. Federation is a very core part of what we do. But the kind of federation that we do is a little more granular than what kind of you were talking about, right? We do actual kind of query federation across these data sources, which is closer to kind of what you're imagining. The way kind of Apollo does federation or GraphQL federation is a little more like gateway federation. So the query planning is not particularly sophisticated. A simple example, let's say you have two data sources, right? You have users in one data source and accounts in one data source. Now you want to fetch accounts, but you want to fetch accounts where the user's address city is San Francisco. So you want to fetch accounts where users are in San Francisco, right? So you're trying to fetch data in the second source through a property that's in the first source, right? These kinds of things are hard and sometimes often what actual people need, right? This is the kind of
The
federation.
moment you get to reporting,
Yeah,
you need this stuff. Reporting
exactly.
is what throws a wrench. Basic create, update, delete is a joke. Basic retrieval is a joke. It's when you have to have a report where you're blending data models together and you don't want duplicate data, which is what relational databases did, which is not what Mongo NoSQL databases do really well. Graph databases like dgraph did this incredibly well because they mixed NoSQL with with relations, which was amazing. But yes, reporting is when this starts to go
When
backwards.
this exactly, right? And so when you kind of start to when you kind of need like this kind of what I'd kind of call more advanced query federation across these data sources, that's where Hasura particularly shines, right? And that's when you can kind of connect to the same Hasura instance multiple databases, but you can also have multiple Hasura projects that become part of a bigger super graph, right? And that's been, I think that's been very important for, like you said, like something that gets enterprise users very excited as well, because they have a very real problem where data is in multiple places. They don't want to duplicate data and move that around. They want to access it where it is, right? And of course, like you're looking at modern applications also need to fetch data from multiple sources, right? You don't want to have you don't want to have one application that is able to fetch data only from one source. That goes against the idea of like different databases for different workloads and microservices and stuff.
So I just had a guest, Roxy, and she's looking to build some software to help people like her son who have these certain conditions with food intake and stuff. So she's been building a front end. She has no back end experience. And I was gonna potentially help her start learning Go and do some back end. But talking to you now, my brain is like she'd probably be much better served standing up Hasura in front of, say, Postgres, and let her continue to focus on her JavaScript front end and do those. Like we can eliminate. You're not eliminating engineering. You're changing your engineering from writing Go code to writing data definitions,
Exactly.
I guess. So that might be something really great for her. Now she's doing this product. It's not a. She's not going to make any money on it. She wants to sort of open source it. So you have pricing plans that would let her sort of get started when you have no budget and you're trying to
Yep.
help the world as
Yep.
opposed to commercial?
Yep. There's a free tier, which is we've done a tremendous amount of engineering on the next generation version of our cloud product, and we call it DDN, the Data Delivery Network. And the free tier of the DDN is kind of similar to the way a CDN works, which is that it's to modern CDNs, which is unlimited usage. So if you're an indie developer and you take Hasura and you start a Hasura project, you connect it to your Postgres database. So you still have to own your Postgres database, right? Maybe you're hosting it on DigitalOcean or RDS or whatever it is. But the Hasura kind of layer for you is entirely free at any usage. So you can be at 1 RPS, you can be at million RPS, it doesn't matter. And you can just kind of use that. But then when you start to become a part of a team, or you kind of start needing kind of, let's say, observability that is
Start
beyond the knowledge,
commercializing it, things like that. Yeah.
it starts to become kind of mission critical for you, where it's business critical for you, and where you are now part of a larger team. That's when you need certain capabilities, and that you kind of see in the more advanced tiers on the product. But that initial base tier for kind of your indie application, for your side project, you're building something, is absolutely free.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, we'll get back to all this stuff. I want to jump you into the time machine. I don't know if you know what our format here is, but I love to hear stories from people like yourself, your sort of journey and how you got to where you are today. So, two questions up front. How old were you when you graduated from high school, or your, say, first year of what would have been university if you didn't go? And kind of where were you living at the time?
I did go to university. I graduated high school
No, yeah.
when I was 18. Yeah, probably 17, 18.
So, what
Sorry,
year is that?
2007.
2007. Okay. It
Yeah.
just gives us a general sense of where tech is. So in 2007, you're 18, graduating high school.
Yes.
So, I mean, what is that like? Not 20, not close to 17 years ago. Okay. And where were you living at the time?
I was in Chennai in the south of India,
Nice. Chennai.
and then I did my
No,
bachelor's
no,
in
no, don't, no. You're not allowed to jump ahead. You got to stay with me. This is where I'm going to start interrupting you. I want to stay there for a moment. I want to stay right there. I want to stay in those years. Okay, here's my second question. I don't want you to think hard about this. Clear your mind.
Go for it.
First memory that pops into your head of you doing something on the computer. Okay, like your hands are on a keyboard doing something. You were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe I just did that." First memory. Don't think hard. First memory. It doesn't matter what it is.
I'm trying to remember whether it was sixth grade. I think it was in school with the turtle game. Like there was a DOS prompt where you do this thing and you make like a turtle, or you make a thing move on the screen. That's this kind of vague memory that I have, but I don't know if it was a turtle or not. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. It was like it's this thing where you give it like the coordinates and an angle, and then it kind of moves around on the
Yeah.
screen. And I don't remember the name of this thing, but I remember it was like a DOS prompt, and you could that's the thing that they showed us in school, and then you could describe the way it's supposed to move and create these funky patterns. I remember that kind of being like, "Poof, what is this?"
Nice. So early childhood, you had seen sort of what you could do with this computer, and you had it in
Yep,
your. Nice,
yep,
dude.
yep.
Nice. Okay, I want to talk about high school. Those 4 years in high school it can be transformative. I have 5 kids in my first marriage. The first 3 girls kind of knew what they wanted to do by the time they were finishing high school. My 2 boys, clueless. And now I've got my stepdaughter who's in her senior year, and she vaguely has an idea of what she wants to do. But my question is, what kind of things were you sort of into in high school? Where would I have found Tanmai, or what would you have been doing, say, in those sort of 4 years of high school?
I was super academic, so I was super studious. So like I think in those 4 years, I was deeply in kind of in science and in math, and reading up kind of like the next grade stuff.
No sports, no arts, no
I think I
music,
think like I
no
think
cricket. I mean, you're in
no
India. You got to play cricket.
none of that, apart from like swimming, which was my regular activity all through school and then through university as well. But otherwise, it was I was pretty deep in pretty much like the physics, chemistry, bio, math. I went to like the chemistry Olympiad. In over those 4 years. And I was just fascinated about like everything that I was learning.
Okay, so did you have a computer at home? Was do you always have a memory of a computer being at home, or do you remember that when it came?
I think in high school, yes. But I remember at the time there was kind of my family does not come from a technology background, and at the time, even though programming was a thing that was starting to become was still not evangelized aggressively in school years. And so my usage of the computer was mostly geared towards kind of like more information retrieval type stuff, more than it was around programming, apart from a little bit of work that I did with Visual Basic and stuff like that for fun. Um, Built out a bunch of things and kind of like that was my first taste of like building programs.
What did your parents do?
My father is in the government, he's a civil servant, and my mother's an investor, and so they come from like an economics, languages, history kind of background.
So they're
So
they're highly educated
yeah,
too. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
but not
Civil
technical,
ser
but not from a
Not
technology.
technical. No, 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 not from a technology standpoint. So your parents had the computer in the house. They must have been using it too for their own personal. Did you have to ask permission to use it, or
They were so
no? You just
polite.
got.
They were just
And you
like,
have siblings. Did you have to compete
yeah,
against that computer? You have a younger brother?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. All right. So accessing that computer at home wasn't a
No,
big
it
problem,
wasn't dating
except
at
the
all.
day that you broke it. Tell me about the day you broke the computer and you had to tell your parents. Come
No, I
on,
did.
come
I
on.
never broke it. I never broke it. I never broke it. But by one day, I think we were playing a game or something, and I was late at night. My father came and he was like, "What are you guys even doing?" And then he banged like the thing, and then it almost broke, but it didn't break. That was close. He was
Wow.
like, my father was really kind of serious about like, guys, do not sit in front of a screen and just play games. This is addictive. It is not good for you.
You must have had dial-up internet too, or some form of internet
Yeah,
in the house. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, 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 yeah.
It's like the modem.
Yeah, you had all that. So there's no way hiding that you were online, at least
Yeah,
at that point either.
absolutely not.
Nice. Okay, so you're really into the academics. You're really focused on learning that kind of stuff. I've been watching like The Big Bang Theory and Young Sheldon, so I feel like you're on like a Sheldon
Super.
track there,
Yes,
right?
yes, absolutely.
So I'm a visual person. I gotta, So I'm thinking like you're like Sheldon there. You're just like, this is. I can't consume information fast enough, right?
Yeah, this is true. This was this. Not anywhere close to Sheldon's level for sure. But yes, I can't consume information fast enough is was my primary hang up in life. So I really liked learning new things and different things as quickly as I could. So the more I was surrounded by that, the more fascinated I was.
So as you're getting close to graduating high school, you got to start making decisions. I don't remember how India works. Every country's a little different. Some people have to figure it out by the time they're 16, others can sort of wait. So my guess is going to university wasn't an option. Like you were going.
Yep.
It wasn't an option not to go.
Yep.
I can't even imagine what your parents would have said if you said, I'm
It's
not going to
not
college.
even. It's not even a thing.
It's
It's
not
not even.
even this thing.
Not even a thing.
So tell me about that process in India. Do you have to take a bunch of tests? Do you apply to a bunch of schools? Are there some schools that are like, talk to me a little
Yeah.
bit about that and the process you went
So
through to
there's
pick a
a so
university.
there's a testing process, and there's about 1 million kids who write an examination, and uh,
You just said 1 million kids. Like you're competing. Like in the US, you're not competing against 1 million kids. I don't know how many kids you're competing against. I
yeah,
don't even know.
probably like a
Maybe,
few 100,000 at most.
yeah, a few 100,000, right? You're competing against 1 million
Yeah,
kids at this point.
yeah,
Wow.
and the top 100 or the top few hundred get to go, and so then depending on kind of like where you rank in this process, you get to kind of choose what you there's limited slots for different programs in the top schools, right? So computer science is the top program, which is I think artificially gated. Like I have a whole rant about that, which is separate, but and so like so a subset of those folks get to study computer science, for example. So then I made it to that, and I got to study computer science at the
So
top
what
school.
was your, out of the million
I
kids,
think 300 something.
You had to be in the top 300 to be able
Yeah.
to
So you
get
had to, I
into.
think you had to be in the you had to be in the top 800 to be in a computer science adjacent in one of the top schools. There's about five to
Does
six top schools, and
do,
within
do
them, in their computer science programs, you had to be in the top 800 or so to make it to one of the computer science programs.
I find that number small, and it must have been so. I'm wondering, as a kid, like if I was your age, like do your parents and people around you, adults, look at that as wow, or it's like, of course, that was you should have been. In fact, you should have been in the top 300, Tanmai. So take the test again.
I mean, it goes both ways. I think sometimes you have kids where the parents put a lot of pressure and they're like, if you don't make it, like it's going to be terrible, it's the end of the world, and that's like bad pressure on children. And sometimes you have parents who are just like, okay, listen, do what you
Yeah,
can
but
do, and we'll
what were
see
your
what you can do.
parents like? They
My
were
parents
happy,
were the
or they
latter.
were?
My parents were the latter. They were super happy, of course. They were just like, yeah, it's cool. They were pretty
Were you
confident that
happy?
they were pretty confident that I'll, I'll get what I want type. So,
Were you happy with that score? Did you think you were going to be, you were okay with it? You thought you were going to do better? That's wild, man. I would have been like at the bottom of that million, dude. I'm telling you right now.
look, but that's the thing, right? That's the thing. I don't think it matters too much. I think it's a little bit, especially at that age, it's a little bit artificial, right? It's like because what you're doing is you're kind of selecting. You're not actually kind of selecting for passion necessarily, right? What you're selecting for is like you're selecting for people who can take an examination, who can grind, and who can prepare really well, right? So
Okay,
which is fine, which is one set of
but,
qualities, but
but you got a million people and you can't be subjective. Like,
yeah,
I hear what
exactly,
you're saying, but
exactly,
in a practical way, you
exactly.
need a way of measuring
That's
that
exactly.
is
Yep. That is
absolute.
somewhat objective in the at least at the first round, right? To do something. And that's exactly why it's the system, why it is the way it is, and it's the most fair while, not being ideal, but of course, but that's what the system is there. But that was fun, and that could like that then I made a bunch of great friends in university then, right?
Okay,
Like
wait,
that.
wait, 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 wait. We're not there yet. We're not yet because you got that score. So that opens up doors to certain universities. So I'm assuming you got into the university you wanted to get into. So what university was that and how close to home was it?
It was IIT Madras, which is in Chennai, which was I think like maybe a 2 hour flight from home.
Okay. So you're excited too to get out of the house. You're finally going to be on
Yeah,
your
for
own,
sure.
man. 2 hours.
Yeah, yeah,
And your university there is subsidized 100%? Are
yeah,
you
yeah.
still
All
have to pay?
almost all of the top schools in India are government funded universities. Um, so they're all subsidized, and then there's a bunch of private schools that are kind of the more usual fee. So all of the top schools are government sponsored, so they're pretty subsidized.
You just have to sort of pay for food, I would imagine, and
Yeah,
be
and there is tuition, but it's not wildly expensive.
okay.
It's super
So
affordable.
you get into the school you want to get into, I imagine you head off to university. Was university what you expected it to be? I'm assuming that you had an idea for a major, what a
Yeah.
CS,
Yep.
a BS, a bachelor's of science, and
Yeah, a bachelor's
yeah,
and a
yeah.
master's in CS. So that's kind of the program I picked. And then I think, yeah, university was no, obviously it wasn't what I expected it to be because I had no idea what to expect from university or college. But it was a blast. I did everything. So it's amazing.
But you're finally on your own. You got to do your own laundry and stuff, right? Like unless you,
Sure,
I
sorry.
mean, I mean, you had some expectation, but it what ended up you had a great experience, is what I'm
Yeah,
hearing.
yeah, yeah. It was I made great friends. I did all even within computer science. I then kind of like I put my fingers in all of the different areas in computer science, right? From systems to programming language theory to computer vision, machine learning to databases to operating systems, networks. I went a little bit low level to like kind of computer organization and then hardware, getting kind of closer to like design of kind of the like one layer below the kernel, and kind of looking at that piece as well. That piece was not that interesting to me, but apart from that, I kind of looked at almost all of these different parts. I took as many electives as I could in all of these different
So
bits of computer science.
Here at Ardan Labs, we believe in empowering companies to reach their full potential through innovative technology solutions. Trusted by small startups and Fortune 500 companies alike, we specialize in high-performance software consulting, training, staffing, development, and now AI. With over 14 years of experience, Ardan Labs has trained over 30,000 engineers and served over 1,000 companies worldwide. Whether you're mastering Go, Rust, Kubernetes, Terraform, or blockchain, we're your strategic partner for performance-grade solutions. Let's elevate your tech journey together. Reach out to Ardan Labs today.
What was your least favorite and most favorite class in those undergraduate degree?
I think the most memorable was not perhaps the course or the topic, but it was a professor and the way he kind of approached a particular course. It was one of the kind of introductory courses, and I remember he made us write. He said like he gave everybody an assignment, and he was like. So he kind of approached from a really rigorous real world software engineering kind of mindset and product building mindset, and like understanding how complex things really are in practice and what kind of adds that complexity.
I hear this every time I ask this question. It wasn't the course so much as the professor.
Right? Yeah, it's always
it's a recurring theme on that.
Yeah, it's always, and in hindsight, it makes sense, right? Like that's kind of how it always is, because we're impacted more by people than by anything else.
But I want to hear the least, because there's a common theme on the least favorite too.
Yeah, I think it was like more of I remember like a few courses that I would put on my least, which would be a combination of like, I feel like the content was lackluster and I didn't engage. Like I wasn't.
The common theme is always just wasn't interested in the topic.
Yeah, so
more than anything else,
wasn't engaging, or wasn't like you as in couldn't kind of see what it was resulting in.
But which class was that? The hardware class?
I think there was a hardware class that was not fun, and then I kind of stayed away from that topic, I think.
Now, did you have a job at all or get any internships during your undergraduate?
Yeah, I did internships all throughout. So
all 4 years.
All 4, and then I did my master's as well. So all 5 years.
We're not. That's too far in the future right now. Masters, and your undergraduate. So, what kind of internships did you? Is it hard to get an internship when you're in that school, or is it almost de facto?
So you have to, and I think you have to do like you get internship credits as well. So I remember I did a project with the university, and like a funded project within the university itself. Then I went to Microsoft Research. Then
when you did the Microsoft Research internship, was that remote stuff, or Microsoft had a campus there in
Bangalore?
Chennai? Yeah. But you went to school in Chennai, but then you had to go to Bangalore for that?
Yeah,
for the summer. I got it. So these were more summer internships.
Oh, yeah, these are all summer internships. You don't have enough time during this semester to do something else on the side.
Work. So it's school, and then you would get these internships. And
exactly.
So it sounds like now that when you're ready to graduate with your undergraduate degree, you already had it in your head that you were going to get a master's, or is that the program that you were in? It was a
so that was the program that I was in, where it was I could continue and do a master's, or I could just leave with just the undergraduate degree.
But you already had it in your head you were going to get a master's. So what was your master's degree specialized in?
Computer vision, machine learning.
The computer vision, and that was a 1 or 2 year program.
1, because it was
1 year,
so I could fast forward some of the credits.
So we're talking. You start that master's work then in 2011. Yeah. I mean, what is the state of artificial intelligence and computer vision?
So machine learning is just kind of machine learning techniques are just picking up steam and getting applied to everything. And so I was.
Is it all C programming too then, right? All C tech, all
MATLAB, lots of MATLAB.
Dude, yeah, I never played with that. But talk to me a little bit about that MATLAB, because I've never played with it. I always just thought of it as an application, almost like a super calculator. But does that build running programs?
Yeah, it's very useful. You can build a lot of stuff with it, like especially for researchers. You can build like full working applications and prototypes. That works quite well.
I just thought it was a calculator on steroids, to be honest with you.
I mean, it is.
I never played with it
on steroids, but it's very nice. It's a good piece of software. It's not bad.
Okay, so did you specialize in something with that machine learning, computer vision?
On the computer vision side, with a bunch of
You're trying to like
So I was doing a project where I was building a drone that could automatically follow. So you could kind of real time segment a particular object on a video feed, and then it would follow that particular object autonomously.
That's 2011. I mean,
Yeah.
it's easy to do that today, but I imagine back then.
Yeah, at that time the techniques were kind of just starting to come together, right? And there was a little bit of like a kind of cross-functional application where you had to kind of hook into the control system of the drone as well.
The processing wasn't on the drone; it had to be on a machine.
Exactly,
And
it
then
had to be on the
you were
machine.
sending.
Exactly.
Was it Wi-Fi
And
or
then but it had
Bluetooth?
to be kind of real time enough, with right sampled well enough for that to work, right?
So the
And
first
then
time I ever played with a drone, one of these toy drones, right, like $600 drones,
yeah,
back in maybe 2013, right? I wrote some Go code and I put it into the drone in my office, and the drone took off and went right up and hit the top of the ceiling, and it didn't move. And I went, oh God, dumb Bill goes to reach up. I know you're supposed to grab it and turn it upside down to shut it off. Dude, thank God it had plastic blades,
yeah,
because my finger went right into the blade and left a mark, but didn't cut it off. I mean, you must have had some
yeah.
drone stories like that.
Yeah,
I mean, your
yeah.
best
So I think,
drone.
but I think, but was kind of super careful with it, because we also got like, so we had like, we got a bunch of drones, some one cheap, and then one I think that was pretty expensive as well. This also turned into like a Department of Defense sponsored kind of funded project that kind of continued its life as that, and so was super careful with the equipment. The blades were thankfully plastic, so I did have a few blade incidents, but
Yeah.
all okay, nothing terrible.
Dude, what's the name of the movie where the kid builds the laser and finds out that the Department of Defense wants to use it for like killing people? What's the name? What's the name?
I don't remember.
I'm gonna.
When was this? I mean, this is a common theme, though. This is a common theme of the Department of Defense coming for you when you're doing cool stuff. But so I was lucky and fortunate to get that sponsorship going, which was a lot of fun. It gave me kind of a sense of like where the space was and how the space works and stuff like that. But that was
the movie's called Real Genius, and it popped in my head because you're working on drones and computer vision, and all I'm thinking is the Department of Defense wants to leverage this for. But in that movie, Real Genius, since the laser's already up in space, they point it to the bad. I'm gonna. You know what? I'm not gonna ruin it for you. Have you ever seen the movie?
Yeah, it sounds okay. It sounds like a great. It sounds like
okay.
a great.
You have to watch Real Genius now.
Actually,
okay. Okay. I'm not gonna spoil it for you. All right, it's gonna bring back memories of university. Here we go. Were you ever concerned though that like the moment the Department of Defense is involved, that the stuff you're working on is going to be like, or it doesn't bother you?
It's called it's like the equivalent of a DARPA here, which is a little more on kind of the research side. So it's the part of the Department of Defense that works with universities on kind of these earlier stage research projects. So that work usually then takes a few more years to see any kind of practical application or decide that. So it's still a little bit distance from that, thankfully. But so you know, at that age I did not have to deal with the
realities
of the reality of like, oh my goodness, is this going to be used to like hunt people and kill them? I don't know. So
when you're a kid anyway, at that age, and you're somewhat immature anyway, like in your head, it's like, this is cool.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
So you're kind of more indexing on the fact that it's a cool and fun application rather than like, what am I really doing?
Yeah, like today you'd think about it a lot differently.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Okay, so now it's 2012. You've got a master's degree in computer vision, right? You are the guy, and you're in Chennai. What are we doing next, man? You're not going back to school. We're not doing a PhD. We're going to work.
Yeah, I'm done. I was like, I cannot study anymore. I'm good. I cannot tolerate another examination, an assignment, or a due date in my life. I am done. And so. And I'd always wanted to start something, even when I was in high school. And so I finally kind of decided to take the plunge. I did not. Usually, what happens is that after either your undergraduate or your graduate, you can kind of interview with. It's like a job fair that happens at all of the universities. So you can kind of start to interview with different companies that come to the campus. Usually, it's all the FANG type folks, and then a bunch of financial firms and whatnot, consulting firms that kind of come in, and then you kind of. You interview with them and you start a process there. So I sat out all of that and decided to kind of start my own. I had a little bit of time where I was transferring kind of my project to the Department of Defense funded stuff, and 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 during that time, what I also did was I started my own kind of consulting business, and then I just started kind of getting into the industry, working with people on kind of real world problems.
So during
And
your
starting to consulting them.
master's, you started to become an entrepreneur. You were making some money doing, but I imagine doing the computer vision stuff for
Exactly
company.
on kind of the machine learning side, right? So I started kind of doing a bunch of that and started consulting with a few research labs, with a few applied research kind of labs, right? Started working with them, and then kind of was like, then kind of got this sense that like this space is a little too researchy for my liking. It's not even the work that I'm doing with the research labs. It's kind of going to take its time to get applied in industry. And then I kind of started gravitating more towards the second part of the work that I really liked doing computer science was more systems and kind of starting to actually build things, right? Like build products and build systems and understanding kind of what's hard, what's easy.
But you're
And that was
doing
kind of
that from a
databases, programming language theory.
from a consulting perspective.
Yes.
So you're taking on jobs now where people are trying to build front end systems with platforms
More like
behind it.
modernizing, kind of like modernizing systems, like older systems at scale, like monolithic systems, kind of thinking about what the modern software engineering version of this is going to be, how are we going to transfer it, what the new architecture ought to look like, and stuff like that. So starting to kind of get
You're getting people off those AS400s, which is a really
exactly
tough
out of
job
there.
to do. I mean, that's really, those systems are solid. Like
Yeah,
they never go
and
down.
and and um and there's a lot of energy, especially in like big banks and stuff, right, where they want to kind of move off these systems, but it's super hard. But also for them, it's also a challenge of like a little bit of exploration of what the new infrastructure looks like, even, right? Even before, like what the utility of this new infrastructure is, even before they kind of lift and shift the old stuff, right? So there's a bunch of stuff like that. There's a lot of new kind of transformation that's happening. They're building absolutely new things too. With the stack, Docker and Kubernetes was very new. I started building a team that was very early on in the Docker and Kubernetes space, early contributors. We were one of the foremost experts in the world at the time for building systems with this, and that kind of got started into pretty successful consulting business.
So how long are you doing this consulting business
I
for?
want to say like
From 2012 to
6 years, maybe
from
5,
2012 to 2018.
Yep.
You're a consultant. Are you growing this business with headcount?
Yeah.
So you're running a full fledged. Did you ever think in a million years you were going to be an entrepreneur and start a consulting business?
I knew I was going to
At least
start
during that
something.
time?
I knew I was
You
going to
did.
start
You
something.
had it in your head that
Yeah,
you
I
didn't
had
want
in
to
my
be an
head that
employee.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You
So
wanted
I
to
had
start.
that in my head.
But where does that come from? It didn't come from your parents.
No, I think it was just more of like life is short and you kind of want to do something.
No. Let's be real. You said I want to be wealthy, and I can't be wealthy unless
I
I'm an
mean,
entrepreneur.
I'm not, I'm a little philosophical about wealth, which is that I kind of lust for impact more than wealth. So it's more glory than wealth, I would say, if you had to like assign it to the most crudest of human emotion. And I think I'm super happy not doing anything, just reading books, just reading great books and watching great movies and consuming great art, and
But
then just sitting at
you
home
could
doing
have
nothing is totally okay.
okay, but you could have glory being a full-time employee somewhere.
So I think it's like I don't think it's kind of like that kind of I don't think it's that kind of glory. It's more of like a I have a fix it energy for the world, right? So it's like I have a problem with the way things are, and I don't like it, and I get angry, and then I want to make it better, but I want to make it better at a certain pace, right? And and I found that the highest form of agency in being able to do that was to do a thing and then to create a team of people who want to do that thing directly without kind of jumping in through the hoops and saying, let me go be a part of this that then does this that then does that. So it feels like you're too removed from the problem. But if there's a problem that I'm excited about, I just want to be able to have like nothing that gets in the way to kind of attack that problem, right? Like the least number of things that get in the way of like trying to do that, which then automatically leads into more of a entrepreneurial kind of journey, right? So that fix it invention energy is what I had.
But the niche your company had was this ability to migrate older systems into newer?
The niche that our consulting company actually had was an understanding of what new application development looks like. So that was kind of the niche. Not so much expertise in the older systems, but we really knew what the new systems look like. So when we'd work with people, we'd work with their experts who knew what the old systems look like. And then we'd help them kind of understand what the new system ought to look like. So it would be kind of like that kind of collaborative partnership, as opposed to kind of what you'd think of as a full-fledged SI or something, right? Which was more of a, oh, we're the experts that can do the lift and shift and we will do it for you, right? We were just like, listen, we know what this ought to really be and how to squeeze the juice out of this new thing and when to use it and when to not use it. That's what we're really good at. And so then we would kind of collaborate with them to help them.
So what happens in 2018?
We developed technology that was internally for our own consulting business, which was a data access layer. And we were like, this data access layer is a critical portion of being able to move to a new architecture. Without a data access layer, it feels like you're still doing too much work.
I love this story. I hear this all the time. Consultancies, solving customer problems, identify a common theme, build tech around that, and then that launches into a product.
Exactly. And so that idea, then we felt confident about, we raised VC, and that's when we started kind of working on that idea and converting that into a product. So we had an internal version of this earlier, but we kind of threw that away and rebuilt it.
All right, time out. Because now this gets super interesting because now you're going to be doing both. You still have clients, you have to do consultancy there, but now you want to build a product and that. So tell me the struggles that you go through in sort of transitioning. Is your job to just finish all contracts and not do any more?
Yep. It was a very tough time because I think we were trying to, we kind of had this illusion that we were going to do like this product work and the consulting business at the same time. And clients were getting pretty demanding. We were kind of reaching that tipping point where we were making a lot of money on the consulting business. And then we had to kind of decide whether to scale it or not, right? And then our scaling a consulting business is different. We're already like close to 100 people. And now if you want to scale from there, it's a whole different kind of business to build, right? And I remember my co-founder at the time said, she was just like, screw this, shut this down. If you want to focus on this piece and we really want to kind of take this to market, then this is not the way to do it. Like we need to focus. We need to kind of focus.
It's a tough decision to do that, bro. When you're making
very tough
top dollars an hour and you're making percents on everybody's head and you have 100 heads, that's a lot of money, dude. That's not a joke, right? And to say, push all your chips in and say, we're going to walk away from our cash printing machine to build this product with there's all unknowns. Like that takes guts, man. You must have been nervous, even though your partner was like, let's go all in on product.
It is a big decision, but you know, it's got to be done, right? And I think like I see that variation of, I think that's kind of our superpower and our energy as well, which is that as a team and as a company, for us to, when a certain thing needs to be done and we believe in the way that the world is going to be, we kind of move to that and go all in on that, even though it's a big risk from what we were doing previously. But because that's just the way it's got to be. But it was a tough decision. It was really tough. We did right by the people. We spent a lot of time helping kind of get our people absorbed into the clients or in other companies, the relationship.
So you sold, basically, for lack of a better word, you let those people work as full-time employees.
Exactly. So we transitioned that, we kind of exited that business and we sold that business into the new business that we started. And so
didn't the VCs demand this too? I'm not giving you money on product if you're not going to focus 100% on product.
Yeah, we kind of started our fundraising. I mean, when we started our fundraising journey, we started that after already deciding to shut it down, right? Okay. Because the whole idea of trying to do services and product at the same time was that we wouldn't need to raise funding, which was kind of like, I don't even know how stupid you have to be to think that that's possible. But so we'd already decided, we were only talking to VCs after deciding to shut the services business down. So we weren't talking to them at the same time.
This product you had been developing, is this the very beginnings of Hasura?
Exactly.
Or is this something else?
No, it's the absolute beginnings of this.
Okay, but in 2018, or even earlier than that, does GraphQL exist? I don't know the history of GraphQL.
It was not about GraphQL, but it was not about GraphQL, and it is not about GraphQL at all. We're still about kind of the idea of like, we at the time had our own API, which was a JSON API, which kind of looked like GraphQL, but wasn't GraphQL.
So you had already had an API that was JSON over HTTP that described the data that you wanted.
Exactly. that
And
allows you
you
to kind of
did
operate
that
in the way that you want.
did that in a vacuum. Like when you
Correct.
saw GraphQL for the first time coming out of
We were like,
Facebook,
this is
your
perfect.
brain must have been like, yeah, this is exactly where we were.
Exactly, right. This is exactly what, and I think like we had to wait for the ecosystem to catch up a little bit, right? Because GraphQL is very hard, and that's still the criticism of GraphQL, right? A lot of people, a lot of developers are kind of frustrated about GraphQL because it's so hard to build. The GraphQL client ecosystem had to catch up, and the GraphQL client ecosystem caught up. That's when we kind of decided to go bet on GraphQL, go all in on GraphQL. That
You know
worked
what
well.
killed me about GraphQL coming from REST is everything's a 200
Yep, and
that you
that's
had to inspect the document. Like that bothered me. I love looking at status codes to
yeah.
determine path.
Yeah. Especially from an ops point of view, right? Like if you want to get a quick pulse of what's going on in your system and you want to get a quick pulse of like, is something wrong? Is something down? Is something slow? Is something overloaded? Status codes are super helpful throughout the entire stack to tell you what's happening.
So why do you think I think Facebook can develop
Yep.
this, right? So
Yep.
why do you think Facebook decided to walk away from status codes?
I
Do
mean,
you know why?
I think they have extremely custom infrastructure, like all the way from their client to their kind of server, in the way that they ship and in the way that they kind of deal with all of those layers are owned by them, and all of those layers they kind of have full control over in what they do. So I don't know if this problem bothers them that much um, because I think like I think all of those layers of understanding and inspecting what is happening, whether to use status codes or not, or whether to use whether to have to inspect the payload or not is kind of decided by them. But because they kind of owned the whole piece there, I think it became very challenging for developers outside because they don't have kind of that level of control of their entire kind of infrastructure, right? And they don't have the bandwidth to say, our entire ops team is going to deal with the fact that we have this protocol now in how our clients interact with our servers. For everybody else, they have to kind of make do with the fact that I'm going to be using stock API gateways and load balancers and caches and systems that already exist that I need to ride
It
on.
was almost like I want the payload to get all the way through, and I don't want any system in the middle stopping it. So if I put a
Exactly.
200 there, I'm guaranteed that it's going to flow all the way from one endpoint to the other. That
Yep.
makes sense. Now, what's interesting for me is you had your own proprietary version of, for lack of a better word, GraphQL. So when you decide to go heads down and transition, there's two questions there. You still have to maintain the old protocol because you've got clients on it. How do you transition? What was the plan to transition off of that? And I am sure, because I saw it with dgraph, that GraphQL wasn't expressive enough to do everything. And so they ended up having their own, for lack of a better word,
GraphQL version of GraphQL.
extensions. So I imagine that you had to make some of the same decisions. So talk about those sort of business/engineering decisions. These are really business decisions. They're not engineering.
Yeah, yeah.
The engineering part's
I
easy.
mean, kind of a pretty standard path, right? Through like major version upgrades where you gradually deprecate the old API out. So we kept the old API around for a while. But from a business and architecture point of view, it was relatively easier because the way that our entire system is architected is that it's essentially kind of it's like a distributed just-in-time compiler, right? So the API server itself, right? The engine is it functions more like a real time or a just in time compiler. So what it does is when a query comes in, it examines that GraphQL AST. It doesn't kind of go and hit multiple resolvers and stuff like that. It looks at the GraphQL query and then it tries to compile that into a language that the underlying system can understand. So let's say it compiles that into SQL, or it compiles that into SQL plus Mongo's query language or whatever it is, right? So it kind of does, that's what it does.
You have like a transpiler layer.
Exactly, right. And transpiler
Okay.
is the slightly more accurate word here, right? So that's kind of what the system is doing. So for us, when we switched over from our JSON, when we added GraphQL, it was just kind of changing the front end.
Was writing a transpiler.
It was just
do it.
changing one of that front end component.
Okay,
of the
so
system.
that's the technical piece. But let me go back to the business side. Though I really love the idea, which you basically built almost an AST or transpiler.
Exactly.
So you could connect anything in the front. I love that. And from an engineering perspective, great. Let's go back to the business side. One of the things I've done when we wanted people off of one system and start using a new one is I wouldn't do any new feature development on the old one. I would only do it on the new one, which would force everybody who wanted those features. It sucks to tell somebody you have a year to get off of this because you don't know how busy they are. And now you're running the risk that, well, if I got to get off of this, then let's just choose a completely different platform. There's a dance that has to go on. But freezing development on old and doing it all on new has been a strategy that's always worked for me. Talk about that from a business perspective.
Yeah. So I think that kind of works. So we ran into this was a more serious business problem for future versions where we were making bigger updates to the GraphQL API itself, right? Where you kind of have a newer, richer GraphQL API that's a little bit different from the previous GraphQL API where you're kind of doing this upgrade. But when we started, for the product that we launched for developers was always with GraphQL directly. So we didn't run into this problem of having to maintain too many old. We had a bunch of people who were using the old technology, but they were just using the old software and it was kind of frozen for them just in time. And we had the benefit of being able to kind of go to a large community of people with just GraphQL. And then we ran into all of these problems a little bit later, but at that time, this problem was thankfully mitigated because it was just kind of frozen for them. And like you said, feature frozen for them and in maintenance mode. And then we just had a new version that had GraphQL only.
So your first true release of Hasura already had GraphQL in it.
Yeah, for sure. Like 2018, like 2020.
So it would have been legacy clients would have been the ones that were still using the old one.
Exactly. And they kind of stayed feature frozen on that. And I think there's still some instances running in the web.
No, back in the 90s when we were developing software, it was all running on-prem. And we always had one customer. You always have one customer that never wants the next upgrade. It doesn't break. Leave me. I don't need your bug fixes. It's not broken. Leave it, right? You always have that. And I think it's a...
And we still have that, right? If you have we have some clients in healthcare and financial services that are super sensitive to any breaking changes, and they've been traumatized by decades of vendors shipping bad quality software that breaks stuff. And they're like, I'm not gonna upgrade. Like this has got to go through 6 months of testing before I upgrade.
Yeah. And as a developer, it used to make me nauseous because I knew what bugs were sitting there, right? But at the end of the day, it's not a bug if they don't run through it.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And some bugs become features at that point too. So giving them an updated bug fix breaks a feature. So super complicated there. I want you to talk to me a little bit about decisions extending GraphQL for your own purpose, because I find that to be a double-edged sword too, because you can't just, you could go to generalized documentation for GraphQL and get you 80% there. And then you've got to start developing your own docs and stuff. So I would love to hear your thoughts on that. And then where you had to start extending GraphQL to access more and more features you were trying to develop.
Yeah, so we took a hard stance to never extend GraphQL beyond the core specification.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. Because it was really important for customers, for users, because you never want to have a proprietary API protocol, right? Because that entire client ecosystem, all of your tooling, all goes to waste if you can't use a well-defined protocol the way it is. So that was a very deliberate decision, right? So we did a lot of work on our metadata side to make sure that you could create. So for example, let's say, you're using ClickHouse and you have this really complex aggregation that you want to do, or a histogram analysis, and you want to convert that into an API model, right? What we let you do is we let you specify, you don't directly connect to this ClickHouse table. What you do is you specify a ClickHouse query. This ClickHouse query is a view that represents exactly what you need from the underlying ClickHouse tables, right? And then the view is what becomes the model, right? So that way your API model looks, exactly has the aggregate and metrics that you want it to be. It's perfect. And it's doing the perfect thing that ClickHouse needs as well.
You know why I love this? You have brought back, and I try to get developers to do this and they won't, you have brought back stored procedures.
Yeah. And this is, but the benefit, but with the idea that you don't need to put stored procedures in the database, you can put that in the application layer. So people don't like stored procedures because the CI/CD experience of it is terrible. You're very scared of making these kind of stored procedure updates to the database because you have to do database migrations, and that's a little bit scary.
Okay, wait, time out. I think stored procedures make database migrations easier because you're going to migrate your database. You're right, you're going to make table changes, you're going to do things. At least you can make the old stored procedures work and the new ones work while you're transitioning your services. I don't know of any other way to do a migration without some form of a database API. And these stored procedures we're talking about, and it's not a stored procedure, obviously, but they're living in Hasura. They're not living in my front end.
Yep.
Right? But you're basically defining a query API, whatever you want to call it.
Exactly.
And I can have multiple versions of it.
Exactly.
Which means old versions can still work. So that's to me what stored procedures bring.
Exactly.
When you put them in the database.
Exactly. Right. And that's exactly what, and this is exactly kind of going back to the first point that you raised, which is like, oh, isn't it a bad idea to expose your database directly to developers? But you're not, right? You have a layer of abstraction in the middle that allows you to decouple the query API from your physical models, right? And that layer of abstraction is very important, right? And so that is kind of that's the approach that we took, which was to not change the GraphQL API, but to allow for all of these features at the metadata layer so that you're getting a standardized API.
Yeah, I love
while
that
getting
idea.
the best of your database, while getting the best out of. So you're able to use PostGIS features. You're able to get like location and distance and computation functions that tell you whether something is inside the region or outside the region and stuff like that.
Vector related activities.
You can do vector
similarity.
You can do like cool real-time analytics on ClickHouse or whatever it is, right? So you can do all of this stuff, but still get a standardized API, not having to extend GraphQL itself. Because we're not talking about GraphQL as a language for the database. We're talking about GraphQL as a language for your API. Hasura is the API to database mapping layer, right?
I am shocked that the industry has not come back to stored procedures for products using Postgres, and even the stuff that I teach, I haven't. Keep thinking every week, I'm going to replace this SQL with stored procedures, and that's what I'm going to teach moving forward. Even though everybody's going to think I have two heads, because again, I don't know how to do migrations without that database.
Without confidently having that abstraction that helps you keep the old version and the new version and gradually
after a migration.
Gradually do a migration, right? So one of the big things that we offer to kind of like to customers is this kind of field analytics that tells you exactly what fields are being used so that you can gradually deprecate old fields. You'll get actual analytics on like, oh, I have first name and last name still being used, but here's my new field, which is name, which is concatenated first name and last name, right? But you can gradually kind of evolve your schema, right? And the query API and the underlying models, and you have that layer of abstraction to help you do that. I think the industry, to your point, is going to move a lot more towards the data side, especially with all of this AI stuff that's happening. People are kind of realizing that this is crazy. We can't be building an API endpoint for every single shape, flavor, slice of data that we want to request. We need more free-flowing access to this data. And people are going to kind of come back to this idea of, let me do more with the database as opposed to trying to do more at the API layer.
Well,
let
plus,
me do more in the database.
From a business requirement perspective, those are engineering hours.
Exactly.
So would you rather spend your engineering dollars building middle layer APIs?
Yep.
Would you rather, and the bulk of your work isn't even there, it's on the front end.
Exactly.
Would you rather put more front end developers to work and get them access to the data? Like, I'm with you, dude. I drank this Kool-Aid a long time ago.
Yeah, and it's also the thing of like, who is the backend engineer that going forward you want on your team, right? Do you want the backend engineer who's an expert at building APIs, or do you want the backend engineer that is an expert in understanding what and how to model data, right? I want the second one, right? I want the engineer who can tell me, hey Tanmai, looking at this workload, what you really need is something that is sharded, optimized for real-time analytics, and can handle kind of archival of data automatically. This is the database, this is the model, this is what we need to use. Oh, this is search stuff, but this is search stuff that is totally okay to do in Postgres. Oh no, this is search stuff that we need Elastic for. I need people who can help me choose the best kind of database technology or the best way to model inside a particular database for my workload. those are the experts that will extract the most, that will speed things up the most as a business for me, right? As opposed to a ninja backend developer who can come in and say, oh, I can give you search on top of like Redis, and I can do full text search, and I'm amazing because I can do all of these amazing stuff at the application middleware layer, which I'm not going to use the database for, and that's just tech debt for the future. I do not want to do that. I want to use the right database that gets 90% of my work done and then just go build the application, right? So I want experts who help me do that.
Teach a software design class using Go, and I teach what I call domain-driven data-oriented design, where the idea is everything you do is about the data. If you don't understand the data, you don't understand the problem.
Exactly.
So I teach this heavy. It's one of the reasons I love Go, because we can separate the data from the transformations, right?
Yep.
And if you're not thinking about the data, you're not really thinking about the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's core to the idea, right? And that's like and as a part of this work now, as we're kind of now moving beyond GraphQL, we're kind of saying, hey, we're really a metadata-driven data access company, right? That's what we're doing. We're making metadata-driven data access possible for all kinds of applications, and we're adding a bunch of new protocols. So we did GraphQL. We're adding on gRPC. We're adding on a new kind of API optimized just for LLMs, so that LLMs can kind of generate these queries in like a language that we call PromptQL. So we're doing a whole bunch of interesting things on the protocol layer. Because the protocol is an implementation detail, right? The hard part is modeling your core domain, the data structures and the methods that describe your domain. And this API protocol stuff ought to be for free. Like it's really like, it's very 2020 to try to think about the best API protocol, right? The future is just use whatever protocol you want, right?
Rob
just
Pike always said, if you get the data structures right, the algorithms become self-evident.
Exactly.
So let me ask you a couple, we got another 15 minutes here. So I want to ask some more business questions since you are a co-founder. You said the CTO as well, right? Co-founder, CTO of...
And the CEO.
Oh, CEO. Oh, even better. I got my CEO. Okay, now, some business questions here, okay? I want to know who your competitors are. So who are your competitors? And well, let's start there. I'll ask more questions. So who currently are you competing against in this space?
So we compete mostly with build versus buy. So the option to... So whether you choose to build yourself or
time out. There's got to be, you're competing against Apollo, you're competing against...
So like I said, right, we're kind of helping people get APIs for data access. Apollo and some of the GraphQL business is kind of more around providing a GraphQL based API gateway on top. So Apollo's pattern is to say...
Wait. I'm going to stop you. Who are you looking at every week or every month to see where they are in terms of their product offerings related to your product offerings? What companies are you looking at?
Mostly just database companies, but more from a partnership point of view, right? Like we want to kind of make sure that the API that we're providing is best in class for particular databases, right? So we're looking at open source frameworks. We're looking at open source ways to kind of connect to those databases, right? You're
telling me that you are a unicorn right now. There is no other product out there
that does what we do.
Does what you do. Okay. Then I'm going to ask you this question. What keeps you up at night? As a CEO of Hasura, what keeps you up at night?
My over the last few months and looking forward into the next few months, all that's been keeping me up is getting a sense of what next generation applications are going to look like. I feel like web and mobile is kind of like now will start to stagnate if it's not already. What is the next kind of application that people are going to build? What is that looking like? And how is that going to need to access data? So that is what keeps me up all the time. Just kind of thinking about like what are those communities? What are those developers doing? What are those applications looking like? How are we going to migrate from our current web mobile to AI enhanced to AI native? Like what is that looking like? What's working? What's not working? What's a science project versus what's adding business value? Cracking that is just top of mind for me.
So what are you looking at for the next 12 months in terms of roadmap? My guess is making sure you've got strong LLM integrations, regardless if that's running in a cloud or local or something, because that's all that RAG development that's going on.
Exactly.
is critical now too. Everybody needs to incorporate it just to say they got AI.
Yep.
So
And also for like genuinely useful applications, right? I think like the most exciting thing about our roadmap is in the next 12 months is going to be the ability to connect a stock LLM, off the shelf LLM, to your real time data, which is I think the killer application for all of these, for all of the AI LLM applications, right? So the thought experiment that I do is with people is if you want to kind of tell your AI to order your favorite item for you when you get home today, right? It can do this. It can do this it can do this work. If you screenshotted your calendar and you screenshotted your DoorDash, it would be able to look at those images and actually do this work for you. But the problem is it can't actually do it for you because it doesn't have secure access to that data on your behalf. So the day we allow our existing LLMs and improving LLMs access to our real-time data and real-time business methods, that's the day when like stuff will start to really blow up in terms of what we are all doing with software and the way that we're interacting with software. That's the piece that I'm kind of looking forward to. We've done a bunch of amazing work here to make sure that LLMs can like safely, not without hallucination, access data and operate on data, right?
what's your core product written in? What is the core
Haskell and
service?
Rust.
Haskell and Rust. Nice. Rust has to have been a new addition to
Yep.
what you're doing.
Yes.
Haskell's interesting. Were you all coming? Haskell, I mean, it's a functional programming language. What is that? I don't remember Haskell. What was that? That wasn't the Java. Scala was Java, right?
Yeah, Scala
So
was Java.
where did Haskell come from?
Haskell, I think Haskell came from, Haskell's very old. It came from like, I think it's an entirely research developed language from, I think the 90s, maybe like from but entirely built on, I think has obviously connections to ML and stuff, but was developed on its own kind of foundation. And then we used it because it's a great language for building compilers in, and it's pretty performant out of the box too. But then as we kind of started offering more infrastructure services, Rust became necessary to add.
Makes sense. I was also, oh shoot, it just left my head. There was another, oh, okay. Feel like this isn't going away, even though the buzz around it is really dropped off, but blockchain. Did you ever do any sort of integrations for
No, we didn't, but a lot
accessing
of our users
L1?
did. We had, and we still have a lot of users who use Hasura for building blockchain applications. So there was that I think still happens. I don't think we did anything explicitly in the product.
So there's no like in your metadata to be able to go and query Ethereum, let's say, for some.
No, we didn't have we don't have an Ethereum connector or a blockchain connector, which I think would be cool, but we haven't done that natively. But I think the community's done a bunch of stuff. Like they've done a bunch of interesting things there.
So what do your parents say today, Tanmai?
They're
That
happy.
you got this big, successful
They're chill.
sort of product and company. They're still in India.
Yeah, they're in India. They're like, so when are you going to relax a little bit? Like, it's time to retire. I'm like, what? I think parents are just like, why are kids working so hard? Please chill. Just relax now. It's okay. You've done a fair bit of work. Let's don't stress so much. Be happy. Enjoy family. Enjoy this. Enjoy that. Chill. So that's
My mom's 80. I'm 55, and she still acts like I'm 5, dude. So
exactly right. But I think in like parents' eyes, it's like you're always like the tiny little child that you were, right? So
that's amazing, dude. Okay, we're essentially out of time. I really love the story. I love the product that you're building. I'm not shocked to hear that it came from consulting work that you did over those 6 years. Though I don't think you would have ever thought, if we head back to day one of university, that you would have been building out data platform like you did, right? You were going to be doing ML and computer vision, and you haven't done any of that, man.
well, the world is coming back to that anyway now, so that's there. But I think yeah, no, absolutely, and I feel like we did not know how big this problem was even when we started the company, right, in 2018. Like we did not know how large and pervasive this problem really is. Like every time I get shocked at how big the problem is. Every time I look at like a large enterprise customer using it, and I'm just like, wow, this is this tiny little problem is so much business value, and I think that's always very interesting.
What I think the biggest problem today now is data privacy, and nobody wants to. So I'm working with clients today where we're building product, okay, where customer data is running through it, but we do not want to be responsible for that data hitting disk ever.
Yep.
And so we're building systems that would allow the customer to deploy it, where they have to maintain responsibility for where that data touches sort of disk. But we have to give them guidance. And I don't know, dude. I feel like this is a massively complex problem because the people that have to take responsibility for it have no clue. And the ones that have a clue don't want to take responsibility for it.
Yep. Yep. I feel like I would love to have a future where every individual and organization can vend their own data and make that available to people. Like that would be amazing, right? Like I don't know if you'll ever get to that, but imagine that you had your own data API for like the bill API. And then the bill API could be accessed and you could monetize it. And if I wanted to use your data for doing stuff for you or whatever, whether you gave me free access or monetizable access or whatever it is. But if that ability to kind of securely ship data and you knew who was accessing it and what they were doing and you gave access to people and whatnot.
You have to it all comes down to trust, right? Like even with these AI stuff, nobody wants to use Gemini because they don't want Google to even sniff a bite of the data, right?
Yeah. Right. So,
and even as a company, somebody's doing AI stuff. I don't want to even pretend I store it. Like the trust issue, eventually you have to trust somebody. Eventually you even have to trust somebody with a key because they've got to plug it in somewhere for an environment variable to exist. When there's some point in the stack where there has to be trust, right?
Yep.
I could even take it down to the operating system certificates. Right? The question is when do you finally feel comfortable that there's sort of trust there, especially with your data?
Correct.
And it's not a problem you need to solve. You're on the other side. Like you store your data wherever you want, dude. That's not my problem. But I'll give you access to it, and I'll give you encrypted access to it as well if that's what you want. And but that to me is a really interesting problem.
Yeah, and that is, I think, what everybody's struggling with, right? And that's why you have so many data silos, and that's why it's complicated to get access to the data. That's what makes it hard also, right? So it is also becoming increasingly harder too. People are becoming more aware, right? Like early, 5-10 years ago, you could just chuck your data wherever you wanted. Now you're like, nope. Like my data should go here and I don't want my data going there. And if I'm in Europe, my data only needs to be in Europe, right? And countries want to have data sovereignty, right? Like they want data about their citizens to be in their country, which is like, there's all sorts of weird stuff happening all over the world at all kinds of levels. So it's going to be interesting.
Industry compliance stuff.
Yep.
Worked in, maybe it was like 2008 and 9. I was working on gaming lottery systems, and we could not use any servers in the United States. Traffic was allowed to flow through the United States, but it wasn't allowed to park itself. The moment it parked itself in the United States, we were violating the law.
Right.
We had to use servers in Europe.
Yeah.
Right. And I was always afraid that some guy in a black suit was going to knock on the door.
Yeah.
Because we made a mistake. It's that same sort of
exactly.
problem, man. It's wild. Okay, Tanmai, if anybody wants to reach out to you after this sort of conversation, do you have like a public way for people to reach out, say hi, and ask
feel free to reach out to me on Twitter. My DMs are open. You can just search for Tanmai on Twitter and you'll find me, TANMAIGO. That's my handle. And that's good. I'm on LinkedIn as well, but I'm a little bit slower there. Twitter is usually a faster.
Brilliant, dude. Is your company hiring at all? You got headcount, or you're?
We are actually. We are on the go-to-market side. We are on the engineering side as well. So yeah, feel free to apply.
Nice, love it. I love it. Dude, thank you for spending all this time. I say this at the end of every show. We could talk for another hour and a half. I think
this was a super fun conversation. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. If I end up in San Francisco, I might ping you. We go.
Yes, you should. We should grab a coffee or a drink together.
Yeah.
How often do you make it? Do you end up traveling to SF at all?
I used to live on the road prior to the pandemic, 30 plus weeks out of the year.
Right.
Now I only travel to Go conferences, but I still do Go training. Like I'll be in Arizona
sometime.
At some point, but I haven't gone back to San Francisco. But if it comes up, I'm going to ping you because I think it'll be fun to continue
absolutely. And you're
Miami.
Right now in Miami, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I live in Miami.
Awesome.
All right. So this is Tanmai and Bill Kennedy signing off from the On Labs podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed the show and hope to see everybody again real soon.